This is episode 480 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, we are heading into the second half of the legislative session. Day 30 was February 17th, last Friday, and it's all downhill from here, right?
Yes, it is at the bottom of the hill. You know, Paul, I was thinking about this. What have they worked on? What's important to the citizens of New Mexico? And I don't presume to be the citizens of New Mexico by any stretch, but just say what's important. Is crime important? Yes. Are they doing anything about crime? No. Is education important? Yes. Are they doing anything about education? No. Is healthcare and lack of doctors important? Yes. Are they doing anything about that? No. But that doesn't mean they're not doing stuff, but it just doesn't happen to be any of those things that, are at least on my list of things that are really hugely important for quality of life and the success of the state.
Yeah. I kind of look at this session as the Spider-Man session, and that is the line of Spider-Man in the movies. I think in the comic books as well, but definitely the movies. With great power comes great responsibility.
Right.
And with the money available to the politicians in the state of New Mexico at this point in time, the bar has to be raised. I mean, I have very low standards for the activities of what happens in the Roundhouse. I don't expect great things, but you have to expect a little bit more than normal because of just the amount of resources. And so we're tracking a variety of bills. I was up there yesterday testifying in opposition to a bill that would have increased alcohol taxation. HB 367 is the gross receipts tax reform bill. Again, it's got the governor's support. It's got bipartisan support. It is sitting in House Tax and Rev right now. And we're at the point in the legislature, before we dive into a few other specifics, where we're close to a full 30-day session in front of us. If a bill was introduced at the filing deadline, there is no reason it can't still pass. It really is all about priorities and whether the powers that be, in this case, our progressive Democrat legislators, want something to happen or don't want it to happen. And only time will tell. Their priorities are highlighted by the fact that what they're talking about and some of the issues that I think we would say are out of left field, and kind of you wonder why they are talking about things like, a plastic bag ban. I know. I know this is what we were all anticipating before the session started.
Yes, those plastic bags are causing what? I don't know. We don't like them.
Yeah, of course, we're here. Wally and I reside in the city of Albuquerque, where we had a bag ban pre-COVID. Then during COVID, it was abandoned for, a year and a half. Then they reinstituted the ban when the so-called crisis was over, although we're still in a emergency declaration by our governor. Anyway, that's a side issue. Then we saw the ban reinstated after COVID in April of 2022, or after a new council took office. They abandoned it. So we've been here living for the better part of a year in Albuquerque without a plastic bag ban. I believe bag bans are still in place in Las Cruces, Santa Fe, and I want to say Silver City as well. So I don't know if Mayor Keller gave a call to some legislators and said, "Hey guys, my mean city councilors won't go for this." They pushed back and got rid of the plastic bag ban, or this is just a holistic approach. But SB 243 is moving. We'll see how much traction it gets. It's called the Plastic Waste Reduction Act. Jeff Steinborn in the Senate, Patricia Roybal Caballero heading to Senate Tax, Budget, and Transportation Committee. It did pass out of its first committee, Senate Conservation. So we will see if plastic bag ban statewide has legs here in New Mexico.
Yeah, and notice it's called the plastic reduction, not waste reduction, because, the plastic bag issue reminds me a little bit of ethanol. Ethanol is the fuel made out of corn that takes really almost as much energy to make a gallon. It takes almost a gallon of fuel energy equivalent to make a gallon of ethanol. Oh, yeah, and thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of water to do that. Well, there are alternatives. If we don't use bags, and they all take energy and they take landfill space, and they take water and other resources. So it is very interesting. But this one is it's a favorite of a large group of progressives. They just love this issue. I think they have plastic bag bill parties, in the off season to plan their next steps.
Yeah, and it's just odd that you don't see other, approaches to what amounts to litter. I mean, let's be real here. You can oppose the creation of plastic, but there's a lot of plastic that is integral in our lives. I'm talking about medical tubes and tools. We just got done, with masks made of plastic or similar materials. What's so particularly unique and special about plastic bags? I'll tell you what is unique on my end is that they are uniquely useful. There is a lot of plastic packaging and things that I wish were more reusable or recyclable, but plastic bags are one of the things that we do reuse around the house. Often that is for only one additional use besides taking the groceries in, which is picking up pet waste, but that has a twofer impact. It reuses something, and it keeps poop out of the Rio Grande. And
a number two impact in more ways than one.
Thank you, Wally. Well done. Yeah. So these, of course, Steinborn will be the first to tell you that he's a big environmental supporter. He also, interestingly enough, has the bill that is attempting to push back against the Holtec nuclear storage facility, which would help begin the transition or move the transition forward on zero carbon-based electricity generation if we had a better storage approach to nuclear waste. But sadly, that is the way things work or fail to work up in the Roundhouse.
Yeah, it is. It is very interesting how these issues play out. So maybe if they get the plastic bag, I'm not cheering for it, the plastic bag ban done, they can move on to more substantive issues that might make a real impact. Paul, I normally don't spend a lot of time on social media, but I did kind of review some of the comments on some of your posts on the plastic bag ban on your website and on social media, and a lot of people are saying, "Well, trash, plastic bag bans are thrown and they create trash," as if we never see fast food sacks with their plastic bags, plastic boxes for the hamburgers, and cups thrown. That whole, whether you throw something in litter or a creator of inappropriate disposal of trash, I think maybe goes above and beyond what the material is. But it was interesting that people are saying that. And a shout out to the late, great Don Imus, who, when he lived in New Mexico, said that the state flower of New Mexico is a Walmart bag on a barbed wire fence. So again, not the fault. It's like the gun issue. It's not the fault of the bag that it's thrown out. It's somebody with not a whole lot of responsibility doing that. And believe me, just because if there aren't plastic bags in places, that doesn't mean litter goes away as well.
Yeah, it is something that educational campaigns have over the years been instituted. And by the way, the litter situation in the United States has improved dramatically. People, by and large, do know, but that doesn't mean that some form of litter campaign wouldn't be more helpful, more of a pro-freedom approach. And that should apply to all forms of litter, because Lord knows we do see all kinds of litter around the state of New Mexico. You don't have to look very hard to find it. And I will say that, I've traveled internationally, and maybe European countries are pretty clean from what I've seen. But once you get into second and third world countries, the litter and waste standards drop dramatically. You get a lot more stuff just tossed out, and you just have to make people respect themselves, respect the environment, respect the people around them. It really comes down to this is part of living in a society. I think it's a similar analogy, but there's a meme that goes around on the internet regarding the grocery carts at the supermarket.
Right.
It's like the test of whether the founding fathers of this country have it right when it comes to self-governance. If people are willing to and take that little extra step of pushing the grocery cart back to the racks in the parking lot, that is a sign that we can govern ourselves and
Yes.
be mature individuals. Those who are just like, throw the cart wherever, those are folks that prove the counterpoint to self-governance. And the same, I think, is something that's relating to litter. I think it's a very similar point and issue.
Yeah, and just a quick aside on the litter issue is that I remember as a child going with my grandparents, we go to Guaymas, Mexico area, and there was literally trash on both sides of the road most of the way there. Somewhere between 1 and 3, 4, 5 feet high. Well, later as an adult, I went back and it wasn't perfect, but they had a concentrated effort that, hey, it's not cool to throw your trash out. Here's what we do with it. And they made great progress. So you can do that on the trash issue. But your point about self-governance, let's, here's a slogan: don't mess with New Mexico. Oh no, that's bad news, because maybe another state used something similar to that. But it's like, we let's push our shopping carts back to the place they're supposed to go and throw our litter away. And maybe that's, maybe small steps in the right direction for our state. That might not be a bad thing.
Well, kind of keeping with this whole theme of personal responsibility and the New Mexico legislature, I was in Santa Fe on Monday morning of this week to testify against HB 230. I had intended, as I often do, to testify on multiple bills, but in the way things tend to work with the legislature here,
the trains don't run on time. Let's put it that way.
Right. Well, I took the Rail Runner up because I'm cheap and saving money for the Rio Grande Foundation. So the taxpayers got to foot the bill for my trip. The foundation only paid $2.25 for that round trip up to Santa Fe. But HB 230 would punish the broad group of users of alcoholic products, whether it's spirits, whether it's beer, whether it's microbrewed beer, whether it's wine, or any other beverage containing alcohol in it. This bill, again, HB 230, would have massively increased taxes on some of these products. For example, a 6-pack of beer would see the tax go up to $1.50 rather than what it is now, which is about 4 cents a beer. So that figures into a 6-pack, 24 cents. You're talking about a $1.50. That's a massive increase on a 6-pack of beer. Beer from a microbrewer would also go up to the same level. So the tax would be for a serving size for microbrew 25 cents. Those are tax advantaged currently in order to spur that industry along. Wine,
which by the way has been that part. It's been successful.
Been fairly successful. Just highlighting the fact that tax policy can actually move the needle when it comes to economic development. You don't need to hand out a bunch of subsidies a la the film industry. In the case of the microbrew industry, just give them a reduced rate. And everybody would see massive increases in taxation if this bill were to pass. That's the fundamental proposition here. Now, I was pleased to see most of the committee, even Democrats on it, not super convinced of the bill. Joanne Ferrari, Representative Ferrari, is the sponsor. She really does like to sponsor these kinds of bills. She's from Las Cruces. I don't want to just besmirch the names of Karens out there, but I think Joanne Ferrari is maybe the legislature's semi-official Karen. She had another bill on tobacco taxation. Again, are we grown adults living in a free society, or are we, going to do whatever our betters in government tell us to do? And yeah, there are serious problems with alcohol consumption, especially at high levels. We have a lot of problems with that in New Mexico. But taking a product that's legally used here in the state of New Mexico and just jacking up the tax on it, that's not a very creative or efficient way to take care of New Mexico's alcohol problems, DUI, et cetera. We've made great strides on the DUI issue, also through the education, similar to the litter thing we just talked about.
A civic, a norm or what, a moray, a social norm or moray. This is what we need to do.
Yeah, getting an Uber. Uber has helped. Having rideshare available is another great thing.
Yeah, and Paul, the whole issue that as it was, and there were some organizations that have been teeing up this additional tax now for 6 months in a variety of venues, but yeah, no one would disagree with the fact that alcohol is a problem with New Mexico, and then the question becomes. Among those abusers of alcohol, what happens if you charge them more? And I will just say, supply and demand, without a doubt, overall, if the price of liquor goes up, the amount of it that's sold and consumed will probably go down. But does it go down in the right places? Does it go down among the social drinkers and among those people who who aren't addicted to alcohol, or does it go down amongst the targeted group that a lot of the supporters of these bills say they want to do, the chronic alcoholic, the person who's violent, the domestic violence abuser, and alcohol a lot of times is a comorbidity with that as well. But the evidence is not necessarily really, really good that would happen, but. That is kind of what I'm still seeing as the implication, although they don't point to a black and white study that I've seen or another success. And then, just to know we live in very interesting times. At the same time, the state's trying to cut back on alcohol. They are actually promoting marijuana, which is very interesting. So it's interesting. I'm not saying that I am not against. decriminalization or even legalization of marijuana, at which point how much we quote unquote promote it, though, that is an open question. But yeah, substance abuse is an issue in New Mexico. Will this make a difference? I think it's turning into a tough sell in Santa Fe.
Yeah, as I told the committee yesterday, I'm young enough that I still remember being in school, and you get one or two kids misbehaving, and the good teachers would point out the perpetrators and punish them. Yeah. The bad teachers would do the group punishment thing, and everybody would wind up paying the price for the failings of one or two folks. And that is exactly where this legislation seems to take us, which is highly unfortunate. And
yeah, and then, Paul, the whole thing, what, 25 cents a drink? That's not a whole lot. You're paying a dollar or two, in a grocery store or wholesale for a drink, and many times that in a restaurant. But, just $1.50 on top of a 6-pack of beer, on top of a bottle of wine. That is a lot. And then what will we do with that? Well, then you get into the potential New Mexico shell game, which we are going to devote this additional tax for this purpose. That commitment about the devotion to that purpose seldom lives more than one or two sessions before they just put it in the general fund and go about their business from there.
Yeah. Well, something else that we have worked on extensively at the Rio Grande Foundation. This happened last week, and while I was unable to get to Santa Fe, I'll make a plug that if you're interested in some of these issues, including the gun issue, and have a conversation in the interview show with Zach Ford of the New Mexico Shooting Sports Association, we go through the various bills relating to guns in the session, most of which are attacks on the Second Amendment. If you're inclined, I encourage folks out there to Zoom in to some of these meetings. You can testify in a lot of the committees. I understand from Zach that the gun bills are more restricted than others, but I was able to Zoom into testimony on HJR3 and HB80. These are the latest and greatest bills on restricting the power of one person, the governor, to keep us in an emergency for an indefinite, forever period of time. I guess the governor has 8 years of in office, and she's probably shooting for
yeah, she's going to create a record that may stand for years and years and years, like the Roger Maris Major League home run record. So
HJR3 would have been the constitutional approach. After 90 days, legislature gets a seat at the table. HB80 would have done the same thing through a legislative bill that would have had to have been approved by the governor. It would have taken effect more quickly. Both of them were tabled, failed in House Judiciary Committee. One of the representatives, and the disingenuousness of folks in Santa Fe, it really gets to me sometimes. I do let it get to me. Representative McQueen said, well, the legislature can at any time invoke a what do they call it? Not an emergency session.
Oh yeah. Call us
extraordinary
session. Yep.
And
with 2/3, I believe, of the legislators, as I recall.
And that is true. The legislature could enact or go into an extraordinary session, but there is a vast difference between deciding to do that, which happens extraordinarily rarely, and having the legislature called into a session to automatically debate and discuss the merits and demerits of keeping the state of New Mexico in an emergency beyond 90 days. Obviously, COVID is one of those opportunities, but there could be in the future other reasons for New Mexico to be in an emergency and have the legislature given a seat at the table in an emergency. And before I kick it over to you, Wally, I'll just say it is widely recognized that the one of the biggest mistakes of COVID-19 was shutting down schools and not having kids in their traditional environments to learn for over a year in the case of New Mexico. Maybe even this legislature would have had some expert witnesses, had some scientific data brought in, alternative sources. They would have at least had to have that public debate. In the McQueen approach, it's all better if you just ignore the problem. I guess each topic has their iteration. In this case, it's like alcoholism. You either have the intervention or you just sweep it under the carpet. McQueen, he is pro sweeping it under the carpet, including in the emergency. Unfortunately, that seems to be the approach the rest of the legislature wants to take. There are other bills coming out of the Senate also relating to emergency powers. I don't expect much better fate for them. And anyway, they would have to go through the House and many of the same committees. So I suspect we're fighting a very uphill struggle to restore democracy, restore a Republican form of government and balance as was intended in New Mexico's and the United States constitutions.
Yeah. And, Paul, the way I think about this, just from a, basic civics understanding of the Constitution is when you're using an emergency power, you're imposing on people up to and including the changing or depriving them of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness without a law. And, it's just being done maybe because it needs to be, but the point of it is that something is being happened that an emergency also should have extraordinary and not be something that just can go on and on and on and on without a review. Although that seems like that's the place we're going. I have a feeling that this will go nowhere during this session or the remainder of the Lujan Grisham administration. If and when we get another Republican governor, we'll see if the legislature might be a little more predisposed to putting something like this in. Although if they do it in legislation, sometimes they would. Sometimes the Republican governor might even veto it, unless it only applies to the next person. And heck, at this point, I would be up for that. We're like, it's going to go in place for the next administration, because I do think something like this is definitely needed in New Mexico and, really, frankly, other states around the country.
Yeah, I would just love to have seen the counterfactual here in New Mexico if Susana Martinez or Gary Johnson or some other Republican was governor during the time of COVID. I cannot imagine Democrats in the legislature being so willing to forego their power and allow a Republican governor to act on their behalf for an indeterminate period of time, but lasting at least 3 years. I think it's safe to say, I'll bet the guessing casa that we are still in an emergency come March 11th, which is 20-ish days, or no, 18 days away from where we stand right now. So we're going to be in an emergency for the foreseeable future. All right. Speaking of emergencies, one of the bills, and this was also heard yesterday, but I was in Santa Fe and I did not attend this particular hearing because I can only be in one place at once, but it dealt with a medical malpractice damages cap, HB80. I did not attend this, not because I don't find it to be incredibly important. I do. I knew how it was going to shake out in the sense that Democrats in the legislature are not interested in addressing the medical malpractice issue that has arisen due to legislation passed in 2021. HB88 would have reinstated a cap of $750,000 for certain clinics that are not part of hospitals. That cap goes to $5 million on January 1st of next year. So there are a lot of other provisions in it, but basically, let's just say that New Mexico's medical malpractice situation as it currently exists is chasing doctors away from the state, making it difficult to impossible to attract doctors. And Democrats don't have any willingness at this point in time to address the issue. Now, again, before I hand it over to you, Dan McKay from the Journal, and I think the Journal does a good job in a lot of ways, but I also think that they tilt the issues in their presentation some ways. The simple fact is that this bill was DOA because the majority is Democrats, and Democrats obey what the trial attorneys have to say on important issues affecting them, because the trial attorneys give Democrats a lot of money to run their campaigns, and so
and a lot of them are legislators.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of them in the legislature, including House leadership and former House leadership, and go on down the line. Joe Cervantes is a trial attorney who made his money through winning a big case. So the point is ultimately that this was a partisan vote. It wound up being a partisan vote, but McKay wrote this entire piece about how people on both sides had emotional stories to tell. Look, I am not going to sit here and say that doctors are perfect and that people who are injured by doctors shouldn't get some compensation for that. And what that level exactly looks like is up for debate, and it's a political decision ultimately. However, when push comes to shove, in a state that is dealing with a very significant medical provider shortage, you have to act first and foremost to make New Mexico an attractive place for doctors to do business, or you will be lacking in medical professionals. And what will the impact of that be on health outcomes in the state of New Mexico? So the point is clear, and there's a lot of other things that need to be addressed in regulating medical professionals and doctors beyond just medical malpractice. But if you're not willing to see that this is a serious issue, when you have all the white coats show up in committee and talk about this issue and what it's going to do to them and medical provider availability in the state, you're picking the side of your special interest supporters, not the people of New Mexico.
Yeah, Paul, in New Mexico's, not ancient history, we've had huge problems with like the workers' comp system, where there was a time where if they didn't reform that, no one could get insurance, and businesses, particularly those in riskier industries like construction and the like, would have come to a screeching halt. And, I think we're already pretty much in that cycle of negative things happening. So, there's no question we want, doctors can do malpractice. There should be consequences for that. But, a lot of New Mexicans won't even have the chance to get medical malpractice because they won't be able to get health care because there's not a doctor to be able to serve them. And so I'm going to make a prediction that this thing is going to turn from a crisis to an emergency if it's not dealt with. And they'll be back in Santa Fe once the horror stories start to become daily occurrences in terms of people not being able to be treated for, maladies, large and small. And you're right. The trial attorneys, they like the system the way it is. They definitely like higher awards because that way there's a lot more chance that they can make money on the cases that they do bring. But people in New Mexico they do like being able to go to the doctor when they're sick, and that is a something that's going away. I don't know, quicker than I thought it ever would. Looking at the reduction in numbers of physicians to this point coming out of COVID, it's been pretty profound. And if they don't get some relief, I don't see any reason why the situation would change.
Yeah, it's a pretty concerning situation. And on top of these laws, you have the gross receipts tax, which needs to be addressed. Now, changing and addressing the GRT alone is not enough to make New Mexico much more attractive to medical providers. It's an issue, but it's certainly not central as far as most doctors are concerned. It's not going to move the needle. We have an aging doctor population, but we also have a very plaintiff-friendly trial bar. The judicial system of New Mexico tends to be friendly towards the people who have the sob stories and come with a lawsuit against a business or medical provider. The state has progressive ideas throughout the entire, it's like a pancake or layers of pancakes on top of each other. You just, that creates part of the problem as well. And it just needs to be addressed in some detailed way. SB or HB88 would have moved things in a better direction, but again, I don't expect any changes to come with the Med Mal bill this session.
No, I agree with you, and I have like I say, I have a feeling, depending on the timing of this, it's going to require a special session at some point, or we're going to have a special. The way the trend is, we are going to be in a bad place here as a state.
All right. Last interesting story. We like to touch base with and keep an eye on our old friend Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior. I was made aware of this story by something I ran across on Twitter, but somebody else mentioned that the Western Energy Alliance specifically mentioned that there's an issue here potentially with a conflict of interest. So let me share the facts of the matter. Of course, we know Secretary Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior. She was a radical environmentalist as a congresswoman, moved up to Interior under the Biden administration, was former chair of the Democratic Party of New Mexico, really has no qualifications for Interior Secretary. A group called Protect the People's Trust did a FOIA request. That's what a public records request is in federal government. And they found that a violent protest that took place at the Interior Department on October 14th, 2021, the protest involved a group called People versus Fossil Fuels. And one of the things they were protesting was drilling on the outskirts of area of Chaco Culture National Historic Site. There was civil disobedience and people doing all kinds of things, I'm sure chaining themselves to various places. It got unruly, security intervened, and there wound up being a little mini riot. 55 of the protesters were arrested. One officer was sent to the hospital. Interestingly enough, Deb Haaland's daughter, named Soma, S-O-M-A-H, she works with one of the groups involved in this protest called the Pueblo Action Alliance, and she's a paid official with them. And seems like there might be an ethical issue here with a high-level federal official whose daughter is also organizing protests of said federal agency.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So,
which begs the question, with her mother's support or without or something, at a minimum, you might want to answer that question. So,
yeah. And of course, Deb Haaland is the sole decision maker over whether to have a 10-mile buffer around Chaco Canyon and oil and gas leasing. There's a rulemaking process underway on that. Also very interesting is that while you get a lot of media portrayals that this is Native Americans trying to keep a pristine climate and, cut off drilling versus greedy oil companies, the reality is that a lot of these Navajo tribal members have the mineral rights around Chaco Canyon. And
the Navajo latis, they have private rights. So it doesn't go to the tribe. It goes to individual Navajo families when there's activity there.
Yeah. And of course, we don't have to reiterate that these are among the most impoverished people in our state and the nation. $200 million is what it would cost them to enact that 10-mile buffer. And it's... I'm sure where Haaland's heart lies is where her daughter is pushing things in a radical left-wing environmental direction, but definitely some real questions there as to what she is doing and how she is accounting for this, I think, clear conflict of interest. And it's something that this has made its way into the national media, but hasn't really been discussed by New Mexico's media, which seems to, I would say they tend to defend Deb Haaland, if anything. They don't discuss a lot of the skeletons in her closet. They're just happy to have her in Washington, I guess.
Yeah, although there is a lot of talk on in the Democrat blogosphere about maybe Deb Haaland being the next governor to replace Michelle Lujan Grisham once her term is up. So they definitely talk about her in those terms. But yeah, in terms of anything critical or even inquisitive with regard to policy with her job at Interior New Mexico, that seems like that is a few and far between from a media point of view.
Yeah, that would be... Governor Haaland, that would be a tough pill to swallow, I think. Well, we won't dive into that one just yet. Thanks, Wally, for giving me nightmares, though. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.